Hello, 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 and good evening, everybody. Good evening. This is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown, and this is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I'm very excited to be before you guys this evening. I hope you guys are off to a great week. I know that it's been extremely hot lately since we've entered into the month of June. We can already tell that summer is coming, and we already can tell that, we are all in the mood to, just go out and about, especially since the restrictions have been lifted. We're coming towards the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we still have many, many restrictions that we have to abide by, even though they have been lifted in some areas, but not in others. I definitely want to take the time out to just thank you all for your continued support of the Beauty in Us Radio. In September, it'll make it a year when I started my broadcast, and it's been a really, really amazing journey. It's been really, really phenomenal to meet such amazing people for the past year almost who've been a part of my broadcast. I've been able to share a lot of great insight with you guys in terms of all of the subjects that I've brought before you guys, and it's definitely had an impact on me and all of the people I've worked with. So this evening, we're going to have a conversation about sports. So one of the things that I thought about earlier this month, and as we enter into the summer right now in 2021, I often think about the coaches in the world of sports who have had to make many, many adjustments throughout the course of the year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I often thought about throughout the duration of the year, I thought about all of the changes and all of the protocols that have had to shift because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I know some of my peers who play sports have had to alter the way that they play sports, because of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the restrictions, and because, they just want to stay safe and stay healthy. And they are doing whatever they need to do in order to make their health and their safety their priority. So I did some research from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that kind of talk about, what it has been like in the world of sports, not just for the athletes, but for the coaches. And later on in the broadcast from 6:30 to 7, and for the second half of the show, we are going to have a coach in the world of sports who's going to talk about his podcast, Making the Play Radio, as well as his work as a sports coach. His name is Mr. Dave Briglio, and I'm very excited to have him on this evening, later on this evening for my show. I've been working with him for the last few years now, and it's been really, really great networking with him. And he's also an engineer, so it'll be a great opportunity for you all to listen in and to actually hear from a coach what it's been like in the world of sports since the COVID-19 pandemic began, and what things look like now in terms of how we are moving forward and getting back to some sense of normalcy. But without further ado, I want to read some stats that I pulled from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that talk about what it's been like in the world of sports. Now, in the world of sports, like throughout the course of the pandemic, many of the athletes have had to test. So a lot of the athletes have had to get their tests on a regular basis for the COVID-19 symptoms, if they've had any. They've had to stay home if they have tested positive for COVID-19, or they've had to wait for test results, or if they've had close contact with the person who may have had tested positive for COVID-19, or who may have developed symptoms of COVID-19. They've had to bring their own equipment like gloves, hand gear, helmets, water bottles, and bats, and if possible, to limit the shared equipment that they use. They've had to stay at least 6 feet or about 2 arm lengths from other players whenever it is possible for them to do for their safety and for their health and well-being. They've had to wear a mask to cover their nose and their mouth to help protect themselves from the spread of the virus. They've had to clean and sanitize their hands before and after practices, games, and shared equipment. And they also had to inform a staff member if they had developed any symptoms or if they felt ill in any type of way or if they didn't feel well at all. So, according to the CDC, under the subtopic of making a game plan to reduce the risk, it says that there was an increased risk of the COVID-19 spread while playing team sports. And it talked about the ways in which many of the athletes and even the coaches can help reduce the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is all helpful, even though we are coming close to the end of a very, very long, dark tunnel of the pandemic. These are still tips that have been studied by researchers and by experts in this field. It says that the setting, choosing outdoor settings as much as possible, and particularly for high intensity activities. So it's better to be outdoors playing sports than indoors. You have a chance to spread apart and to not and to not contract the virus as much. The proximity, maintaining at least 6 feet of separation. And again, that's about 2 arm lengths, and to avoid close contact with other people. It talks about the field of play, which says to try to choose a larger playing area so that you can spread out from each other. Mask use. It says wear a mask that covers your mouth and nose at all times. Even though many of the restrictions have been lifted and all of the mask mandates have been lifted in many areas, not just here in Baltimore, but throughout the world, I still think that some of these tips can be used for people who are not vaccinated, who are not fully vaccinated, especially athletes who may be in the field or even on the court. I think it's important for them to follow some of these guidelines, even if they have not been fully vaccinated, so that they can still do their part to make sure that they stay safe and to make sure that they exercise caution in terms of making sure that other people are safe and healthy as well. Exertion level, it says limit high intensity activities to the outdoors. Travel, it says limit travel required outside of the local community. Ventilation, it says look for facilities that have high ceilings and use ventilation practices such as opening doors and windows, and use portable air cleaners that have HEPA filters. It says that frequently touched surfaces and shared equipment or gear. It advises all of the athletes and all of the coaches to wipe off frequently touched surfaces, equipment, or gear with disinfecting wipes before and after use. And clean hands, washing your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, or using hand sanitizer with at least 60% of alcohol before and after using machines. And it talks about the number of people and limiting how many individuals per se you interact with. And it also talks about the duration of time you spend playing sports and being in that vicinity with your peers and with your fellow teammates. It says that if you choose to stay indoors, it says keep your activities as brief as possible to avoid prolonged exposure. Now, a lot of this stuff, a lot of these things and a lot of these tips, they really come into play when you think about all of the athletes, especially in the sports world. When we think about the NFL players, the NBA players, and now even with baseball season, we think about all of the athletes that play indoors and outdoors and how much they have to do in order to stay healthy and in order to stay safe. I know that earlier on in the pandemic, a lot of people, it was very, very difficult for people to listen to those restrictions and to abide by them. I know that for the athletes, I know some of my peers, a lot of them have had to get tested on a regular basis, so that because of how much exposure they had and because they took risks, as athletes, exposing themselves to the virus. And I'm glad that I have Mr. Briglio on this evening to talk about what it's like to be a sports coach and what it has been like to make all of these adjustments throughout the course of the year, throughout this pandemic. And it'll be really, really great for him to share that later on in the show. But these are some of the basics. These are some of the basic tips that they give you, that the CDC gives you in order to reduce exposure to virus. And even especially as an athlete and as a sports coach, it says that it also says that prepare before you participate in sports. It says bring extra masks and hand sanitizer with at least 60% of alcohol. It says prioritize participating in outdoor activities over indoor activities and stay within your local area as much as possible. It says that if you're using an indoor facility, allow previous groups to leave the facility before entering with your team. And if possible, allow time for cleaning. And it also says check the league's COVID-19 prevention practices before you go to make sure they have steps in place to prevent the spread of the virus. And lastly, it says that if you are at an increased risk for severe illness or have an existing health condition, take extra precautions and preventative actions during the activity or choose individual or at-home activities. So again, it's giving us more tips in terms of how we can stay safe and how we can not only keep ourselves safe, but how we can do our part in order to make sure that our fellow teammates, in this case, in the world of sports, for the coaches and for the athletes, are safe and these are the ways that we can ensure that we're following all of the protocols that have been implemented by the CDC and other guidelines. So it says, take steps to protect yourself and others. And it says to know your teammates. It says what your teammates do off the field is as important as what they do on the field. It says that if they are attending gatherings without masks or physical distancing, going to bars or restaurants, etc., it says that puts the whole team at risk. So I know oftentimes a lot of athletes like to party and they like to hang out and have a good time, but I just want to know what that has looked like throughout the course of the pandemic. I know that we all couldn't gather like we wanted to in many settings because we had to abide by all of these restrictions. So I just wanted to know what that was like for a lot of athletes and for a lot of coaches who like to hang out in bars and at restaurants and who just like to have a good time. And I just wonder how difficult it was to do that because a lot of the bars and the restaurants who were open at maximum capacity or at limited capacity, they weren't allowing everybody in. And a lot of the businesses have suffered in the process because a lot of people are very accustomed to going out for the weekends or they have their happy hour. But I just want to know what that's like and what that has looked like. And even though, again, the restrictions are being lifted in many areas, that fear of being exposed to the virus is still there for many people. And the CDC also provides tips for parents. It says that if you help your athlete follow mitigation measures off the field, what one athlete does at home or off the field can impact the entire team. And the CDC also says, talk to your child's coach and let them know you support all measures to slow the spread of COVID-19. These can include practicing outside instead of inside, limiting attendance at practices and games, and requiring masks of athletes, coaches, and visitors. So I think that the advice that they give to parents is really critical because, we all want to make sure that our kids are safe. A lot of the parents want to make sure that their sons and daughters are healthy. And one important part about being an athlete that I've learned from my peers and from people that I know is that, you have to make sure that you're healthy and you have to make sure that you feel your best and that you are your best when you go out on the court or when you go out into the field. And it's your responsibility as an athlete and as a coach to work together and to make sure that you all are performing at your best. So again, this is great advice for parents who have children that are athletes and even children who have parents that may be coaches. And it also says, stay home if you're sick. It says that if you have symptoms of COVID-19 or if you have been diagnosed with COVID-19 or if you are awaiting for your test results or may have been exposed to someone with COVID-19, you should stay home and not participate in any sports. So I can imagine, and I know that some of my peers who are athletes, some of their teammates were exposed to the virus throughout the course of the pandemic, and how that has complicated things a lot for the rest of the teammates. It's very important for everybody to do their part on and off the field because we don't know we don't know who, we don't know, we think that we have an idea of what we're doing, but we don't really, sometimes we're not really aware of our actions and how that may impact others when we're just enjoying ourselves, or if we're just having a good time, or if we sometimes unconsciously, not we unconsciously put ourselves in situations where, from a health standpoint, where it can be detrimental. So I think that all of this advice is really, really good. It says that having smaller team sizes, it says that sports with a large number of players on a team may increase the likelihood of spread compared to sports with fewer team members. It says limit your team with a core group of participants by restricting non-team players from joining when your team is short players, and not adding new members during the season. It says maintain careful rosters of which players, family members, coaches, and staff attend each practice and game, and have current contact information for everyone. If a COVID-19 exposure occurs, timely notifications are critical, and this information will help contract tracing activities occur more smoothly. It says that this is also another tip. It says reduce physical closeness between players, volunteers, and spectators when possible. It says maintain at least 6 feet between yourself and your teammates, other competitors, and officials while actively participating in sports. Avoid high fives, handshakes, fist bumps, or hugs. Focus on building individual skills like batting, dribbling, kicking, and strength training. And keep space between players in the practice areas, including on the sideline, the dugout, or on the bench. It says wait in the car or away from the playing area until just before the warm-up period or the beginning of the game. It says avoid congregating in the parking lot or near the field before or after games. If it is not possible to avoid congregating, practice physical distancing by ensuring there is at least 6 feet between participants. Wear a mask over your nose and mouth to reduce the risk of virus transmission. Limit non-essential visitors, spectators, and volunteers. Ensure they wear masks and maintain physical distancing. And another tip, it says wear a mask, of course. Low-intensity sports and high-intensity sports differ. It says that if you emphasize wearing masks, limiting physical contact, taking extra precautions with shared equipment, and practicing physical distancing helps prevent the spread. And higher intensity sports that are limited, people who are engaged in high intensity activities like running may not be able to wear a mask if it causes difficulty breathing. You can also increase distance for high intensity activities. And if you're not able to wear a mask, you can consider conducting the activity in a location with greater ventilation and air exchange, and where it is possible to maintain physical distance from others. So I know that a lot of people who like to do their early morning jogs or their evening jogs, a lot of them don't really have to concern themselves as much with people crossing paths with them and transmitting the virus, but it's still important to, again, maintain that physical distance and just exercise some caution there. Because I do know that there are people that like to do their morning jogs and people who like to go to the gym in the mornings. I know that, you're actually taking more of a risk when you go to a gym or in a public setting, and when you're around other people. I know that it can be very, very difficult to keep your distance and to prevent the spread. But again, that physical distance and that mask wearing guideline helps in every situation. Your mask gets wet, be sure to change it, as it may become more difficult to breathe through. And it says that the CDC does not recommend the use of face shields or goggles as a substitute for masks, but it says that they may be used as eye protection in addition to the use of a mask. So a lot of this, a lot of what I just shared, it contributes to a lot of the obstacles that many of the coaches and many of the players have faced in the world of sports throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. I know that, I know that a lot of athletes were exposed to the virus throughout the course of the pandemic. I know that a lot of the indoor sports like basketball. A lot of them didn't have fans in the arenas for the past year. I know that for the outside sports like football and for baseball and even like with tennis and other sports of that nature, they didn't really have any fans in the arena either. Because if you think about how many people are in these stadiums, and if we think about how many people come out and support the athletes that they love and the athletes that they vouch for, it wasn't really that same feeling while we were all on a national or even a global lockdown. We had to suspend a lot of things in the sports world. A lot of us who like to purchase our tickets to see our favorite players or to go to our favorite games on the weekends, and if we like to spend time together as families, we all weren't able to do that when all of the restrictions were implemented throughout the course of the year. And I think about how much money has been lost because of the fact that people weren't purchasing tickets and attending these events. And I know that the revenue wasn't the same. So it really puts things in perspective, and it really makes us think about how we interact with others and how what we do affects others, whether we think about it or not, and whether we believe it or not. So I think that all of these tips that have been used and that have been given by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, I think that it's very helpful. And I think that even once this pandemic is officially over, I think that people are still going to be apprehensive about, gathering together and coming in close contact with others. And as they stated in here, high-fiving, shaking hands, fist bumping, or hugging. It also says that, of course, wash your hands, minimize the sharing of equipment or gear, not sharing any foods or beverages, limiting your travel outside of your area. And it has advice for coaches here too. So I think that I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to end this segment for the first half of the show about our subject for the evening. I think that this is important too for people to understand. It says that for the advice for coaches, the CDC says that it's important for the coaches to send a welcome email or call to parents and for youth players, and to inform them about actions that these programs will take to protect players. And it's also very imperative for the coaches to remind them to stay home if they are sick, or if they still have symptoms of COVID-19, if they have been tested, or if they have tested positive, or if they are waiting for their results, or if they have been around someone who is sick or who has symptoms of the virus. And it also emphasizes to the coaches how to be a role model. So setting that example, wearing a mask that fits, and that covers their nose and their mouth, and encouraging family members, fans, officials, and sports staff to wear one during practices and during games, providing hand sanitizer before and after practices and games, educating players about how to cover their coughs and their sneezes with a tissue, and discouraging spitting, as gross as that is. I've seen people do it. Reminding players about physical distancing and identifying markers, and indicating distance of at least 6 feet, or even, as they usually say, 2 arm lengths. So that means if you're able to touch the person beside you, you're actually too close, whether it's to your left or to your right. It says that practice, focus on building a player's individual skills and cardiovascular conditioning so that they can limit close contact with one another. And it says to check with your sports administrator to make sure they are following cleaning and disinfection recommendations. And last but not least, it says clean high-touch surfaces and objects on fields, courts, or play surfaces, such as drinking fountains regularly or daily as often needed. So again, these are all great tips that the CDC provides when they're talking about how to prevent the spread of the virus in the world of sports, not just for the athletes, but also for the coaches of the athletes. I think it's very, very important for us to remember that, again, when you're an athlete, You have to keep yourself healthy. You have to stay safe, and you have to make sure that you're feeling your best so that you can do your best. It's really it's very, very difficult to stay motivated as an athlete when you don't feel your best, or when you're ill, or when you're not taking these steps in order to make sure that you stay healthy and that you are in a position where you can, make that sacrifice that you need to make in order to keep your team healthy too. And even as a coach, I think that the advice for coaches that they give, about setting an example and providing all of their players and all of the athletes on their team with resources to use so that they can keep themselves healthy, and so that they don't have to they won't have to be subjected to all of the symptoms that the COVID-19 virus has brought. So I just want to, before we end the segment and before I bring Mr. Briglio on to talk about his experience as a sports coach, and as he speaks about his Making the Play podcast, I want all of you guys to think about all of the parents who have children who are athletes, or if you are a parent yourself, and if you just happen to be a coach in the world of sports. It doesn't have to be as one specific sport. It could be baseball, basketball, football, tennis, rugby, or whatever, lacrosse, whatever. I just want you all to think about the ways in which we can help our athletes stay healthy, and how you all as coaches can continue to do your part, and to stay healthy, and to make sure that your players are healthy. Again, the vaccine's still available for all of the people who want to be vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. I got the Moderna vaccine last month and even the month before. So, I feel better knowing that I did my part in order to make sure that I'm safe, and in order to make sure that my loved ones are safe and healthy. So I think that it's important for all of us to remember how our actions impact others from a health standpoint. And again, if you are an athlete, or if you are a parent of an athlete, or if you are a coach, for a team, whether it's high school, middle school, elementary school, college, whatever age group of young people, I'll say, what are you doing in order to make sure that all of you all are safe? What type of preventative measures are you using in order to make sure you all are staying healthy? Are you abiding by any of the CDC guidelines, or the guidelines that have been put forth and implemented by your local officials, your state officials, your county officials, or even the federal government, in a way where you all can come back to some sense of normalcy? Because we are all still under these restrictions, even though many of them have been lifted and many of them have given us a sense of normalcy again. We still, for some people still have to wear their mask and stay distant from others, and we're not totally out of the woods yet. So what are some of the things that you've been doing in order to do your part, and in order to help us prevent the spread of the virus and come out on the other side of this tunnel healthy, safe, and strong, and better than ever? So without further ado, I'm going to bring Mr. Briglio on to talk about his experience in the world of sports. And I also want him to talk about his podcast, Making the Play Radio, which I've had the privilege of being a part of. So without further ado, please welcome to the Beauty and Us Radio right here on Awesome Guide Radio, Mr. Dave Briglio. So how are you doing, Mr. Briglio? Welcome to my show. This is your very first appearance on my show. I've been a part of your podcast, but this is an opportunity for me to bring you on to talk about the work that you do. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nelson. Happy to be here.
Yes, absolutely. And again, thank you for taking time out to be a part of my broadcast. So I do know that you are heavily involved in this, in the world of sports as a coach. So could you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do every day?
Sure.
For you.
Well, the day job is as a civil engineer. So that's what I do, something I enjoy doing. It's I like math. I like science. I like building things. So that's what I went to school and trained for. But the thing is, I was taught to always like what you do or to do things you like more, really, more towards that. Not just that, well, here it is, you better like it. That's what you do. It's more of, what do you like? Then go do those things. And that's how that came together. And sports has always been big because in my family, just not a big family, mom, dad, my sister, and I, sports are, that's what you do. You go have fun, you go compete, you try different sports, and that's where you learn to do things. You know, if you do well, great. If you don't, okay. And that really carried me through school, through college, and in my career. And that's what I do in the meantime. My family now, though, I have my wife and I have 4 daughters. They are ranging from rising sophomore in high school to, the one who graduated college a year ago. And they played a variety of sports. I think when I was counting the other day how many different sports they've played, it was, honestly, I think it might have been 10 over the years that they've played between the 4 of them. Anywhere from basic rec to competitive club to collegiate. It really varies quite a bit. And I think that's one of the things that has helped my girls be successful in terms of, again, not whether or not they're on a fancy club or what their win or loss record is, but just that whole idea of how you work at something and how you work with others, you know, and again, find things you like. And I think it's done a lot even when they said, you know what, I don't want to play this sport anymore. Because again, they're making choices and realizing, okay, you know, we do stick them in sports as parents, but it's really more of, okay, sometimes it's convenient. Sometimes you want to get them out of the house. But, you know, they make a decision as to what they want to go towards and they find passion. And I think that's really the important thing. Moved around a bit. I'm from the Midwest, Chicago. My wife is from Atlanta, so we spent some time in the Southeast and Atlanta and Jacksonville and Florida, and have been in Baltimore now for, 8 years.
Yes, yes, and that's really important. You brought up many good points about just keeping children motivated to want to do sports and just being open to the possibility of them wanting to explore and try new things. I think that oftentimes, and I've seen, like, even with some of my peers and even growing up, I know a lot of my peers have had parents who've just pressured them to be perfect in the world of sports and to, be the best and to not give up and to try to make them do things that they're not really interested in anymore, or just because, it makes them feel good, or just, for bragging purposes. Just putting a lot of pressure on kids to succeed in the world of sports even if they decide that they don't want to invest any more time or energy into that specific sport. I do know that a lot of my peers, even, like, they've been pressured to be phenomenal athletes, and they're under so much pressure to be perfect and to not be flawed in a way, and just being under that intense level of scrutiny and just not having any room to just be their own person or to just explore and try new things. I do know that sometimes parents, they put a lot of pressure on their kids to succeed in the world of sports.
And as a coach, so I'm a high school JV coach. I've been coaching rec for 10 or 12 years, since my kids were in it. I'm also a commissioner of the local rec program. I do the main sport I get. Baseball was my first love, and then some basketball. But my family, we don't grow very tall, so basketball had to become truly a recreational backyard sport. But I ran into lacrosse, of all places, in the Midwest. And some I've landed here in the the East Coast now, where it's very popular. So that's the sport, girls lacrosse, I'm focused on. And I also do coaching for U.S. lacrosse. And that is one of the things that is really, it's the best and the worst part about sports, is there's that passion. And then all of a sudden you find out the passion the kids had was really just a mirror image of the passion their parents wanted them to have. And they have to make that decision. And in some cases it works out really well. It's like, okay, that's good, you made a choice, that you applaud that they make that decision. But you're right, it can be really tough when you're literally playing for somebody else, because it's not a game anymore, it's a job. And that, I really think, has impacts that last for decades on people. And we all know people like that. Again, I'm several decades ahead of you, and you can just about sense it, in the boardroom and conferences. You come across somebody who's got this sense of confidence that it's slightly manufactured. It came from sports, and let's not blame it all on the parents, but somewhere they thought that's what they needed to do to have their worth. And then you find those people that you can't, you play sports with them, in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, and you can't believe what an amazing athlete they are. And they have no formal sports background because they just love to play. But then they went on to school to be a student, and they are some amazing athletes that I find in adult leagues, and they truly only play for the love of the game. And that's what you want for all the kids. But yeah, it's tough when you see it and you just know there's a kid out there that really, they're playing at a high level. They have the ability, the skill, and the, I guess, the temporary drive when the clock's running. But you learn to sense it after a while that they don't really want to do this. And you get caught between, can you get them to love it again? Or do you just have to let it run its course? Because you don't want to be the one that says, you know what, I don't think you like this, you should quit, because you could be wrong. You never want to be that coach. So I hope that kind of helped in with what you're talking about.
Yes, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. Another question that I wanted to ask you was, how has the world of coaching been in the world of sports since the COVID-19 pandemic began? Because some of my peers who are athletes, they've shared with me a lot of the adjustments that they've had to make, in the world of sports, because of all of the restrictions that have been implemented by many of our officials and just by a lot of our health experts. What has that been like throughout the course of the year? Because I know that the sports world has taken a huge hit, especially in the professional world of sports, throughout the course of the year, financially and even in non-monetary ways.
Well, I think in my world, which again is youth and high school level sports, and I can definitely even speak to my daughter playing in college, who she was on the team that she thought she was going to be competing for a national title 2 years in a row, and it interfered both years in college. And again, she's not in it just for the title, but it was a team that really, got completely derailed last year. And then, it just got in the way again this year. But the hardest part was the do nothing. And then all of a sudden around February was, okay, let's go do stuff. And the scrambling and trying to do so much at once. So for rec sports, all of a sudden we started doing some things in the fall, and then we had first there were restrictions and guidance, and then there was a shutdown because again, we were moving indoors in the winter. And then in the spring, all of a sudden, as things got better, it was February 1. Hey, guess what? You get fields on March 1st. And we're thinking, you've given us a month to do what we normally have 6 months to organize, make sure we have coaches and uniforms and all those types of things. That was really complicated. I mean, we couldn't even get uniforms for the spring. Fortunately, we had uniforms from last year that we never used, and we just passed them around and said, okay, put these on. Let's see what fits you this year. And then at the high school level, they were doing multiple seasons of spring. So you had athletes that were sitting idle for, the fall, the winter, and all of a sudden come, I think it was maybe mid-February, they were playing their fall season for 6 weeks. And literally the next day, I think was it April 17th or something like that? All of a sudden it was, and without missing a day, and now you're spring athletes, which was just really complicated, to try and change gears. And all those of us who have jobs that we leave work to go to the high school to do those things, it got complicated. But the biggest thing really was the fact that we weren't able to spend as much time for me to get to know the kids. So our season as a JV coach, the varsity is continuing to states this one and next week, but we only had a 6-week season. So, and my players were just getting their stride. They were really just getting to know me and me to get to know them, because as a JV coach in Baltimore Public County Schools, I coach at Towson High School. Juniors can't be on the team, so I can only have freshmen and sophomores. So my elders of the team, the sophomores, we had literally 10 days together last year for them to get to know me and me to get to know them. And then this year, again, 6 weeks and done, right as they were hitting their stride, which was a shock to the system. I mean, I was exhausted because of all the things we were doing. Part of me kept saying, I need this to be over. I'm not as young as I used to be able to do, coordinating a rec program and coaching a team and a rec team and a high school team. But the day it was done last Friday was very difficult for me. It was just over. And I'm sure a lot of coaches are going through that they didn't have the bonding time. And just as they were making those really deep connections, it's over. Then there's, the actual COVID things you mentioned about, how do we stay safe, and are the restrictions too much or too little and whatnot. But that's the biggest thing for me for COVID. It was hurry up and go extremely fast till you feel like you don't have much left. And just as you're, realizing your team is getting somewhere, it's stop. It's done.
Yes, I can definitely imagine how hectic that feels like, especially as you mentioned, like you're so accustomed to getting to know your players as individuals, and you having the opportunity to see them grow throughout the course of their time with you, like even throughout the years. Even though you said you only coach JV, you can still see growth in each and every one of them as you spend more time with them, and how that's been cut short because of all of the events that have transpired. And that also leads me to ask you about your podcast that I have been fortunate enough to be a part of, Making the Play, which is it bounces off of what you do. So could you tell us a little bit about your podcast and how that started?
Yeah. So it's been going for, 4 years now, about 4 years. And I've got a variety in addition to Making the Play, which is the signature podcast that I'll talk with people like yourself, organizations, individuals, for an hour to give them a profile to really amplify their presence and help more people. I've got a few other short ones, and we've done 150 to 200 podcasts. That came about because I got real frustrated with my own career. As an engineer, I'm a civil engineer. My clients are counties and towns. So even though I work for a private consultant, I've always seen myself as a public servant. I'm making things for you to use. That's what we do. We do roads, we do highways, we do all the things that it sure isn't building rockets, exciting things like that. But it is it's a public service type thing. And all of a sudden, as I started moving up in my career, the profession was secondary to the profit line. And, the interesting part is if you do a job really well, you're going to make money. I mean, it just will. You'll do it on time. You'll do it right. Everything's going to be fine if you're committed to doing it, teaching people and whatnot. But I just started seeing that it really wasn't the interest, and it was becoming a grind, which was also upsetting to me. Because, again, I got pointed towards this by a teacher who said, hey, what are you good at? And I said, math and science. She said, what do you like doing in your spare time? I said, well, I like to, aside from sports, I like to build things. He said, you should be an engineer someday. And that's just threw that at me when I was in 7th grade. And I didn't know what kind. And again, ironically, I thought I'd be the one that would build rockets, and I'm the one that digs holes and fills them up. That's what civil engineers do. But it's been a labor of love. when suddenly it wasn't, I said, I need to really start. I had great mentors early on. I've been working for 20 plus years. I want to hold some workshops to help people, to help their employees, really keep the drive going. And then I realized they don't want to hear that. So I thought about where the real love is and where it was, where those seeds were planted for me. And it was sports. I said, okay, so how about this? Let's work with the people who work with youth and high school athletes, including the ones that will never play for a team you've ever heard of. They won't play in college. They'll play at the Y. They'll play on an open lot, and so that's where it came from. And just by coincidence, I just ran across somebody on LinkedIn who had a profile that they were a life coach of sorts. They used to be a civil engineer. And when I called her up and said, hey, how do you do that? She was just talking, said, oh, and I had this podcast for a while. You should call them if you want to try it. And I did. And it was a different group. And they said, do you want to do it? And I just said, yes, not knowing what I'd talk about or who I'd talk with. And it grew over time. And that's where it came from. And really the whole idea, making the play is, it's a sports phrase, but it really means, you put the effort into the things you want to commit your time to. They're not going to be easy, but it shouldn't be a grind. It shouldn't be one of those things you're just waiting to get to 5 o'clock, and I find so many great organizations, individuals like you, and it's not just sports. Some are teachers. In fact, one of my more recent interviews that we'll be posting in the following week is literally just about a charter school, public charter schools just for girls, and where they bring leadership in sports into the school's curriculum as a public school. And the sports, to be honest, were a very, very small part of it. It really was about, I think, very much more similar to a lot of your messages, and confidence and things like that. So like I said, I've got 4 kids and they're all in school. Well, one's done. I still got 3. So I'm not going to be switching careers just yet. And I don't know if I will, but I decided, you know what, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to start doing it sooner. And if I do nothing, maybe I can't turn the corporate world of my profession around to really see the responsibility we have to find the love in the work and all that again, to see it as a vocation and not just a way to get a paycheck. I said, well, if I can't do that, I'm going to help amplify other people's messages first. And then my own started coming out and developing it. And we'll do that. And, who listens to it? I see podcasts old and new. People keep listening to them. It still surprises me. Look and say, wow, who's listening to that one? And somebody, they are. And it feels pretty good. Like I see, that I'm doing something, because they can surely turn it off. It isn't something that I promote. It's just out there. I don't promote very heavily. And that's been a satisfying thing. And I've gotten very selective now with the guests, where I really just want to make sure it's not so much about putting out show after show. It's just, hey, that's somebody I want to talk to. And within that discussion, I'm sure we'll hit a few talking points that'll help people. So that's the podcast.
Yes, and I can definitely understand now that I have my own show. I definitely understand what it's like now to produce very, very. It's about the quality of the content and not the quantity of content that you present to the audience, because anybody can just have a public platform and just hop on a platform and just vent about whatever they want to vent about. But and people really don't, like, when it all boils down to everything, people really want to hear some inspiration. People don't want to really hear about anything that's negative, because we have enough of that, in the media. You can look at different sources and find that everywhere else. But I think that it's important, especially as a person who has a public platform, to use that, because a lot of us don't understand how much influence we really have until people come to us and say, well, I watched your show the other day, or, you just happen to just see new faces when you check back in to see who actually listens to your show. You become familiar with some of the listeners, but some of them who are new, you surprise yourself when you sometimes look and see, okay, the people are really listening to me, and so they're really taking me seriously, so they really want to hear what I have to say. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, because it's about the quality of content that you produce, not the
Yeah.
quantity of content that you produce. Because anybody can, like I said, anybody can jump on a platform and
Hmm.
vent about whatever they want to vent about, but people really don't want to hear that. People really want to hear some inspiration, and people really want to feel better after they listen to quality, whether it's from your guests or even it's from you, if it's from you. So I definitely see where you're coming from in that aspect, especially now. Even though I'm almost a year in, I definitely see how imperative that is because of your influence. You have to keep that in mind all of the time.
Yeah,
Um,
and there was a group. I've stopped working with them just because of my time, but it was a woman who she wrote a book about women's hockey. She had started playing professionally back in the late '60s. Who would have known that was even happening? And she wrote a really great book. And she contacted me and said, "Hey, could you help me start a podcast?" I said, "Sure." So I was her co-host for a while, and then she got another woman to um, talk with her, and they were really just talking again about more of gender equality and women, and it wasn't just hockey. It was obviously very heavy on that in the sport. Um, but what was interesting was she had said to me, she's like, I can't believe we've already done 20 of these. And she's like, I just looked up and most podcasts are over after, before they hit 10. And they're continuing on without me. They're doing very successfully doing it. But the thing is that, what she has in common and I have in common, you have in common, is that you're doing it for no reason that is business related. I mean, sure, we'd all like for these things to be able to leverage that, hey, this is what I do for a living. Who doesn't want to do that? And that's where I'm, trying to transition to that over, the coming years here. But the thing is, it's just not it really is play, and that's why, why are we doing this on a Tuesday evening, right? We could be doing other things. We could be laying on the couch, but we're doing this because it doesn't feel like work. And I'm so excited when you said you were going to do this. First of all, you wrote, you're what, your third book now? And
yes, I am.
um, that's what I said. Wow, I want to talk to this guy. This is, and I had no idea how young you were either at the time until we talked the first time. But that's just the beauty of it on these, is that people are listening, they are being influenced, but that's kind of after the fact. You're like, oh yeah, pretty cool, but it's not the thing where I want to influence and control people. In fact, I'm glad you brought that, because that's really when I talk about sports, and I love sports is such a big thing for me. And again, I was never even a varsity player in high school. Okay. I played club ball. In other words, if you got $50, you're on the team. You buy a stick. We drove ourselves to games, all that kind of stuff. But it's so important, because that's where you learn to do things for the right reason. You really do. And the sports is the first and the last thing. It's how you come together. First of all, individually as people, as you mentioned, like with COVID, you figure out how you affect other people, your actions. Maybe you're not going to get sick, but maybe you spread it to somebody who will. It's part of that. Like, oh yeah, I'm strong. I'll be fine. But what if just my hand, from here to this doorknob to that doorknob and someone's grandmother, that type of thing. But that's about, community and team, which has nothing to do with points on a board or what the sport is. So that's why it's so big to me, because it's one of the first things we learn is learn to play with other kids, learn to play with other kids. And you see how badly we play as adults on, the ball field of the boardroom and out in our public figures and things like that. So, yeah, it's this is just a great way. And I'm so excited that you're doing this too. And like I said, I love what we're talking about here and what you brought into it, because I hope that's what people see here is, especially, The Beauty in Us, your book. It was just so inspiring, in terms of you got it, it's in you, but you gotta get reconnected to it. And that's what I see sports does. So we all find our own avenue, back to it. So I'm rambling on a bit, but I wanted to get those things out there.
Yes, I definitely understand where you're coming from. I have two more questions before we end the broadcast. My two questions. One is, what has the pandemic taught you, and how can the listeners listen to your podcast? I know that you've been on several platforms, but how can they listen, and what has the pandemic taught you now, since we are coming on the other side of it now, in terms of getting back to some sense of normalcy that we had before?
Yeah, so the pandemic, the importance of just contact with people. Engineers are not the most socially based people. A lot of us say, wow, you're an engineer. I go, yeah, I guess I'm one of those, and that I'm very much an extrovert. But it has made it difficult to work. And the technology, don't worry, we can share information. We can see stuff on screens. We were able to have meetings without being near each other. The technology took care of all that, but it made it really difficult the energy was gone. The connection was gone. Urgency, the good kind. Like, hey, let's knock this out. Hey, I just figured out how to solve that. Let's do it. Everything was, kind of mañana. We'll get to it. Which really makes the day drag on. And, that definitely carried into some sports. Can't see a kid's, fortunately, you can see the kid's eyes. You can see the life up here, but, you couldn't quite connect as deeply. So that was the main thing from the pandemic. The podcast, if you Google Dave Briglio and Making the Play, if you Google Dave Briglio and podcast, you'll find multiple shows. But the main, it's called the main, I guess, station that all these other shows are on is called Changemaker Radio. It's on Spreaker, so it's speaker with an R, Spreaker. It's cross-posted everywhere. But if you go to the main one, you'll see a lot of podcasts on there. And some are based on, they're shorter. The other ones are all much shorter discussions, single topic, little series about, oh, that's interesting. And those are, as much as I like my feature ones where I get to meet and learn from people like you, the short ones have been great because I call them drive-sized. They're a single topic, 15, 20 minutes long. Sometimes they go into 30. But it also includes a recent group of women national and Olympic volleyball players. We did that for Black Lives Matter. They were talking about what it's like, these three Black women, all of my age, with kids, about what are the issues that are out there. And it was three strong Black women talking to a white guy, and it was a great conversation. That was one of my favorites on there, actually. So that's what I recommend people is go to the main one, because aside from the feature podcasts, there's a lot of really great short ones where we get into some panel discussions with some really cool people.
Yes, and I definitely thank you again for appearing on my show. You've shared a lot of great things within the past 30 minutes that you've been talking about your experience. I know that you were one of the first coaches to actually appear on my show. So I know that people are passionate about sports, and I know that there are a lot of parents out there who have children who are athletes, and there are a lot of parents who may be athletes and also who may have children who just participate in sports too. For the love of it, not just to go pro with it, but just to enjoy it, even if they choose not to pursue it in the future. So I really do appreciate all of what you've shared. I think that it's definitely insightful. So again, I want to thank you for coming on my show.
My pleasure.
And talking about this, because it's a subject that a lot of parents need to hear and a lot of children need to hear. Because again, sports, we all need some type of outlet somewhere. And I think sports provides that outlet that a lot of people need in order to feel better about who they are and to just find their talents.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got, it's, they say when you're in the zone, when you're playing, it's not about the performance. It's about the fact that there's nothing else on your mind. I mean, I'm glad I never saw myself on film when I was in my zone. Okay. Because it probably wasn't anywhere near as good as I thought. But yeah, it really, it's spiritual. There's nothing else that matters except that, the ball and the person you're playing with and, that connection. So that's what it's about.
Yes, absolutely. So again, thank you for appearing on my show. I will definitely keep in touch with you, and I will definitely. I know that the listeners will definitely have definitely enjoyed this broadcast. And again, like I said, I'll keep in touch to see what you're doing because I know that there's much more in store, and I just want to see where things are in the future once all of this blows over in terms of the pandemic being in the rear view at some point. So again, thank you again for
Thank you.
Your time. So that wraps up another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome Guide Radio. Before we close out the show, I want to make a couple of announcements. I want to let you guys know that next week on June 15th from 6:30 to 7 p.m., we are going to have Dr. Camille Hammond from the Cade Foundation with us to talk about her foundation. But I also want to share with you guys that the Thoughts magazine with Miss Nija Howard is what I have a column that's supposed to be released soon. So I'm definitely still preparing written material for the magazine. So I want to let you guys know that the Dear Nelson column, I'm open to your ideas and I'm open to your suggestions on what you would like to read about and see in the magazine. So I've been jotting down a lot of great things. And I've been jotting down a lot of subjects that I feel as though need to be addressed. And I'm just open to everybody's suggestions, and I'm open to what you all want to read about because that's what my journey as an author has been. I've had the opportunity to just dive deep into different subjects and different arenas in the literary world. And even with my new book, The Beauty in Us Radio, Our Souls and not The Beauty in Us Radio, The Beauty in Us, Our Souls in Armor. That's volume 3 of my book that was released last month. I want to make sure that you all head on over to Amazon to get a copy of that. It's a book of prayers that I've created for this post-pandemic type of feel. I hope you guys take some time out to read that. Some people have enjoyed it already. But again, I want to hear what you guys think about the Dear Nelson column, and I want to see what you guys want to read about in the Dear Nelson column. I've jotted down many ideas already, and I've put them on paper. I've written them on papers, but I still want to hear what your suggestions are. But that wraps up another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio. So Dr. Camille Hammond, as I said, she'll be with us next week from 6:30 to 7 p.m. with her from the Cade Foundation, her foundation, to talk about adoption services and infertility treatment and how her foundation helps families and individuals with that. So again, this is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome Guide Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown. Make an appointment to meet me back here at 6 p.m. next Tuesday. So I love you guys, and I thank you for your support and encouragement. I don't take it for granted, and I love you guys so much for all of the support and all of what you've provided to me, all of the resources, all of the love, all of the encouragement. I'm grateful for it. So take care, and I'll see you soon.